Welcome to the Polgar Chess University. In this lesson, our topic is attack and counterattack. Let's get started with our very first example that was played in a very recent game. This position has been reached after only 14 moves of white and 13 of black. It is black's turn at the moment, and I suggest you take a little bit of time on your own and try to figure out what the correct continuation here is for black. The first thing to look at is the material balance. And if indeed we look at that, we realize that white is up a pawn at the moment. Of course, black has clear compensation in that the G file is open and that black knight is on G4 in a very attacking position. Regarding the other black pieces, it's not so obvious that they are doing so great. The black bishop on A7 is ready to be exchanged, or potentially could move to B8 to aid the attack, and the black knight on H5 doesn't seem to do very much either. Not to talk of the other two black pieces, the black rook in the corner on A8 or the bishop on C8, which neither are anywhere near in getting developed. And yet, surprisingly, in this position, black has a winning attack already developed. So again, I suggest you take your time and try to figure out on your own what black should do right now to lead the attack. As we know in chess, your strongest piece, especially when it comes to attacking, is your queen. So in this case, perhaps the first thing to look at should be the correct move actually, which is moving the queen to H4. Obviously, this move now threatens with checkmate in one move with queen takes pawn on H2, and the black knight and the queen, knight on G4 and the queen are beautifully cooperating at the moment. The question is, what can white do against this threat? Let's look at the most natural responses. One would be if white right now pushes the pawn up to H3. Before we go further in that direction, let's check out what happens if white instead plays queen H3. It surely stops the checkmate threat, and in fact it offers the exchange of queens. In general, trading queens in a situation when you're on the defense and your opponent is going after your king's throat, it's a good thing. However, in this case, black can clearly and forcefully transform the attack to material advantage. And it's true that the attack is over, but after the exchange of queens, now black has a discovered check at his disposal. A discovered check that guarantees significant material gain. Now the white king is in a check, it needs to move out, and then the knight can capture also the rook on F1 and leaves black with at least a rook plus. Let's go back again and look at the position after black plays queen H4, which obviously threatens to checkmate on H2. Let's look at the possibility of white playing bishop F4 and protecting the H2 square in that way. Then black would capture, removing the protector of the H2 square, although a new protector is coming up with queen F4. Now unexpectedly, this bishop that seems to be in an awkward position hiding on A7, it comes to play with bishop to B8, attacking white's queen, and of course if the queen now moves away, then black checkmates right away with queen takes H2. So that's out of question. Let's go back again and see what else white may come up with. Well, let's look at H3, the most natural move in such cases, that not only stops the checkmate threat, but also attacks black's knight at the same go. And now black can gain time by not only moving the knight away, but at the same time attacking white's queen also. And now the white queen needs to be very careful where to go. If you look carefully, you'll realize that the queen only can go backwards, because all other squares on the F and G files, H files, are guarded by black. So the white queen needs to retreat. Queen E2. And let's look at this position now again. Here already we can see the nice cooperation between the black pieces. The rook on the G file clearly aiming at white's king. The queen is there to aid. The two knights are beautiful. And that bishop on A7 will come to play when needed as well. So right now, because of the existing pin over the G2 pawn, black can safely capture on H3. This is of course not just a win of a pawn, but an immediate checkmate threat also at the same time. So now the checkmate threat is for black simply capturing on G2, actually either with the queen or with the rook. Either one would be checkmate. So now what can white do? The problem is none of the white pieces can directly come to the help to defend the checkmate threat on G2. So the only way white can really try to defend against it is by moving the F pawn up, F2 to F3. So now white's queen from E2 does protect on G2. The problem is that now again the black bishop in the hiding will come from A7, trading on E3. Moreover, it's with a check. And when the queen recaptures, then checkmate arrives by either rook or queen captures on G2. Let's go back just a couple moves and see what would happen if instead white would rather play, instead of F3, would play G3. Well, commonly for such and similar situations, black can simply destroy the defense in front of white's king. Of course, there are several good ways to go here. Playing knight G4 certainly would be one of them, with the idea to then checkmate with queen H2. It's true that white can delay that, but nevertheless the cost would be hefty. White would have to give up the queen for the knight. So the other move would be knight captures G3. When pawn captures, then trading bishops, queen takes, and rook takes, check. White cannot avoid losing the queen. And then after king goes to the corner, no other choice, knight G4 is a deadly move. And now white cannot really prolong the game much longer, with the checkmate threat coming up on H2. A very nice attacking example. Let's move on to our second example in this lesson. And here also we can see that white has started an attack, and the black king had to go back to the middle of the board, even though earlier in the game black succeeded to castle. So what's going on here in this position? Materially speaking, we have complete balance. Even number of pawns, queens, rooks, bishop, everything is equal. Black clearly wants to capture white's rook on D7. In fact, it is being threatened 3 different ways, by black's bishop, rook, and king. The most natural move right now would be to exchange the rooks on D8, and then the black rook would also recapture on D8, and the game would likely to go on for quite a bit longer and with an unclear outcome. So if white doesn't just want to go on with a long game and maybe give up most of his advantage at the same time, it's time to look for something more effective and successful. So let's think, in addition to trading rooks, what else may white try? I don't think it will take you long to realize that in order to do anything different than trading the rooks on d8, white most likely will need to consider to sacrifice the rook. Well, and indeed, the correct move right now is sacrificing the rook. The question is, where should that sacrifice come? And the correct move is rook takes pawn on f7. The reason why this works, because so few of the black pieces are on the king side. You can see how the black queen, two rooks, and bishop on c6, they are all on the other part of the board, far away from defending their king. Right now, white is threatening with various things, for example, capturing on e6. Another unpleasant threat would be the rook check, or even just the bishop g6 move. But the big question is, as it is with most sacrifices, what happens if the opponent simply accepts it and captures the rook? In this case, the game now ends real quick by the white queen coming to h5, check, king moves to f6, and checkmate on the next move, queen g6. A very nice combination and effective at the same time. Let's move on to our next example. Here we are. In this position, the question is how to continue. You can notice that black is already a rook ahead, so white has sacrificed the rook, and unless they find a clear follow-up, either how to checkmate black's king or win material back, white will be in trouble. I suggest you take some time and try to figure out the correct continuation here to either win material or try checkmating black's king. Interestingly enough, the natural bishop a3 check would be a big mistake. It certainly would work beautifully if now the black king moves down to e8, and then white could checkmate with queen f8 or queen g8. However, black can do better, namely by blocking the check, and happily give up the rook for the lower value bishop, but at the end result, in this position, black would still be a bishop ahead. So let's go back one more time to this position and look what may be a better solution. Well, that better solution is playing bishop to e5. Now the catch is that the black queen is being attacked, and if it moves away from the attack, then already the bishop moves to d6. Again the same idea, checking from the same diagonal, but without giving black the opportunity to block the check with their rook from c8. Black now has no other choice but moving down to e8, and now it's game over. White can checkmate with queen f8, or as a matter of fact, anywhere on the 8th rank. So let's go back and look at the situation after bishop e5. What happens if black tries a trickier move, namely playing rook g8? This looks like a rather tricky move, because if the white bishop captures black's queen, then the black rook from g8 will capture the white queen. Also, if the white queen simply moves away right now, then the bishop on e5 will fall. So it seems that black is just fine. However, reality is different, because white can still win this game with the correct move. And that correct move is to make a forceful move, sacrifice the rook. When the king captures, now white can bring away the queen from attack, and at the same time the white bishop still maintains the attack over the black queen. Black now can block as the best choice, and then bishop captures, rook captures, bishop e4, and white here has an excellent position, even though materially speaking black is okay, but the difference in the safety of the two kings clearly gives white the advantage. And of course, just purely materially speaking, compared to our starting position in this example number 3, black was a rook up, and now it's a material equality. And then of course, strategically speaking, white is clearly better because the black king is in an unsecured position. So let's move on to our next example in this lesson, where we have this position in front of us. It's one of those examples when it's really important to ask yourself the question, what does my opponent want to do? And in this case, that's a very nasty and tricky idea that black has. Those rare situations that the black bishop is in the white corner on h1 helps black to threaten to checkmate with the queen on g2. So white certainly has no time to waste, because black may checkmate on g2. So in other words, white either needs to make a forceful move, that is a check, or try to defend it directly. Well, in this case, white has a direct attack that can succeed. Try to take your time and figure out the brilliant idea that white has here. And the solution right now is sacrificing the queen. And you'll see how beautifully the two bishops work together along with the rook, forcing black into various discoveries. And now the first discovered check. The black king now is under attack. And when it moves to h7, things don't get any better, because now a double check arrives. Now not only the rook, but also white's bishop attacks the black king. King goes back to h8, and now white checkmates by simply moving the rook back to g4. Now the two bishops beautifully work together, and black can only delay the checkmate by giving one rook up after another until it's game over. A beautiful, beautiful example. Let's see our next example. Here we are. Again, it's a similar type of position where white is heading the attack and the black army mostly is on the queen side. And that's what black is paying for. In the meantime, we can see that white has a beautiful battery on the b1 through h7 diagonal, with the white bishop behind and the queen in front of it, and this is one of the very typical attacking patterns. Also note that white is a rook behind, so unless white comes up with something very forceful right here, right now, it will be black who wins the game. But fortunately for white, it's their turn and ready to play queen h7 with the support of the bishop. King now needs to move, and here comes the key point. Even though white could capture on g7 or could give a check on h8 with the queen, both very natural moves, neither of those would be the optimal choice. It's very important to prevent the black king from running away. Like for example, it would happen after the check. So going back to this position, the key answer right now is to play bishop a3, very important check. And now either black needs to plug the square on e7, the runaway square when the back rank checkmate arrives, or pretty much the same happens if the black king now, instead of bishop e7, starts running. It's still checkmate because the white bishop is guarding the e7 square. So the bishop a3 check was really important, making sure the black king will not be able to run away on e7. Let's go on to the next example. Here we are. In this position, white again is the one having the attack, but things don't seem to be so simple. I'd suggest for you to think about what white should do right now. White has several good-looking ideas, but not all of them work. For example, one move that looks interesting, Queen f7, a queen sacrifice, does not work, because after queen takes queen, rook d8, black will not trade rooks, after which the checkmate would be unavoidable, but instead black would play queen f8, blocking the check right away, and then if rook takes queen, rook takes rook, black will be ahead a rook. So this clearly would be a blunder. So not all combinations work. The other combination with knight e8 with the idea of rook takes and then sacrificing the rook, followed by queen check and f6, trying to checkmate now on g7, doesn't work either, because now black would play knight e6. Therefore, the best white could do at this stage is to constantly try to give checks to the black king and give perpetual checks. So now we know that these combinations do not work because of the resourceful defense that black has. It's very important that when you're thinking about a combination, you're in the constant search of the best defense of the opponent. You generally shouldn't be gambling in hoping that the opponent will not find the right defense. If you can find it, chances are your opponent will as well. The best choice right here for white actually is the more peaceful b4 move. Instead of queen f7, b4, chasing black's knight, and if it moves away, then play rook d7, attacking the black queen, and then follow it up with queen takes pawn on f7 with a winning attack. Very nice. But the most important part about this example was to understand the defensive resources that black had in this position against the immediate combinations. And then of course b4 gave white actually a significant advantage. And let's see one more example on this theme. Here we are. In this position it is black's turn, and black is under immediate threat, namely for the white queen to checkmate on g8. Things look pretty bad because, for example, if black would play bishop e7, trying to defend the g8 square with the rook, then white checkmates immediately with queen h6. Or, if the black bishop moves to g7, then checkmate in 2 arrives after queen h5, black blocks, and queen takes checkmate. And yet, in the starting position, black can win if they find the correct move. And the beautiful defensive resources to play rook g2. And now white is in trouble. If king captures the rook, black can force the exchange of queens with queen c6, check. Or if the queen captures, then black can pin white's queen, again hoping to trade queens. And if white wants to delay that by rook d5, then after rook c1, white doesn't have a way to get out of it, needs to block with the queen, and black achieves their goal by exchanging queens. A very nice defensive resource. And finally, let's see the jewel of the week. Here we are. In this beautiful endgame that was composed by Procas, it is white's turn, and the question is, how can white win despite their significant material disadvantage? The only hope that white has is to create a passed pawn real quick and try to promote it. So therefore, the solution here is advancing the pawn. If now black responds with rook b2, white simply advances the pawn further and the pawn cannot be stopped. But what happens if black captures it? Now, if pawn advances, rook b2, and it's game over for white. Therefore, there is an extremely tricky and beautiful move here for white, playing b3, with the idea that if the black king indeed gets to capture and gets to the b file, then after b7, the black king is blocking the b file, so rook b2 will not be sufficient to stop the pawn from promoting. But it's not over. Black can be trickier than that by playing king a5. You may wonder, but how is this tricky? What happens if white advances the pawn? Well, look at this one. Black can play rook b2, and now after pawn promotes to a queen, black can play a tricky rook b3 move. Now the beautiful part is, if queen takes rook, it is stalemate. Yes, indeed it is. However, white is still winning after blocking the check, and when rook takes, king takes, white's pawn is faster, and therefore the white pawn promotes first, and then the game is easily won once the white queen either blocks the pawn or, even better, moves to b2, checking and captures the pawn. What a beautiful, beautiful endgame. I hope you enjoyed this lesson, learned some about attacking and counter-attacking, and of course, I hope you enjoyed our Jewel of the Week. Thank you so much, and so long until the next lesson. Bye-bye.